Chapter 1. Down the Jordan.
Good luck!
Have a safe journey. Come back soon. Those standing on the dock waved to the departing boats, seeing off the first geographical expedition. Abraham Van Weyden, sitting at the helm of the last boat, also waved to Morty and Sarah. Well, it's about time. 2 years have passed, and there has still been no full-fledged geographical research, except for short-term forays into the forest or steppe. But now, although to be honest, this expedition is mostly not geographical, but geological. The colony of Israel needs resources. At a minimum, iron and copper. As a maximum, the more, the better. And it wouldn't hurt to find an oil field at all. Over the past 8 farming seasons, the available tractors have emptied the Neptune's fuel tanks. And if things continue like this, then in the near future, we will either have to switch all agricultural machinery to firewood, that is, gas generators, or even put it on a joke and return to horse-drawn traction, which we really, really don't want. The good news is that salt is in the form of a salt lake found nearby in the steppe. Moreover, with such a concentration of salt that it is impossible to drown in it with all your desire. A kind of miniature Dead Sea. But that's all past business. And now the main task is to go down the Jordan River as far as the range of a specially assembled expeditionary radio station is sufficient, carrying out, in addition to geological exploration, research of the surrounding wildlife and flora. And of course it is his, Abraham Van Weyden's, responsibility to draw up a map and a location of Jordan, since in the future it is planned to use this large river, which is not inferior in width and fullness to the Nile, as the main transport artery, building new settlements on its banks.
Well, let's hope that it will be so.
Abraham Van Weyden glanced at the makeshift tray attached to the side of the boat.
More than 30 feet. Quite enough even for the Neptune, not to mention galleons and smaller river vessels. Oh, I wish I had an echo sounder instead of this shrubbery. But what's not there is not there. While.
Meanwhile, 3 boats were slowly carrying 12.5 researchers downstream. Yes, only 12.5. On the one hand, it's not much to go to a foreign, completely unexplored land, and on the other, 10 Marines armed with Springfield rifles are a formidable force capable of protecting 5 scientists from many misfortunes.
Yes, and the 5 of us, Abraham Van Weyden smiled.
We are also worth something, although we are, first of all, a well-functioning scientific team. Miguel de Torres is a physicist and astronomer who was unanimously elected head of the Academy of Sciences of the Colony of Israel. Michael Finkel is a rabbi, translator, and doctor who has completed a refresher course and is now able to silence any colleague from not only the 17th and 18th, but even from the 19th century. Yakov Stern, or simply Yasha, as he asked to be called, is a professional prospecting geologist, radio operator, and pilot of the only airplane in the entire colony of Israel so far. And Yakov's compatriot, Samuel Kaplan, a biology teacher who also fled to Germany from the Russian Revolution, made a scientific discovery on the very first day of his stay in Zion, identifying the description of the overgrown giraffe Indracaterium, a giant hornless rhinoceros that lived on Earth in the Tertiary period of the Cenozoic era and became extinct millions of years before the appearance of man. And now, hoping to discover new species of animals that have long since passed away on Earth. But so far, there have been no surprises from the local flora and fauna. Both banks, one wooded, the other steppe, maintained their depressing monotony. The forest was also represented by palm eucalyptus trees growing along the coast, and countless herds of large ungulates, classified by Samuel Kaplan as living fossils, roamed the steppe, grazing the lush green grass, such as the primitive bull and the primitive deer. This went on for 2 days, until quite unexpectedly, the Jordan, which had been flowing in an easterly direction, turned to the north. And that's more than good, Abraham Van Weyden mentally stated, making entries in the travel log about the change in the direction of the current.
And if this continues, then this is a real chance to penetrate into lower latitudes, which in Zion with its exclusively belt climate
should mean significant changes in both the flora and fauna. And so it happened. Before they had even sailed 100 kilometers, the surrounding landscape began to change rapidly. The forest on the western bank first thinned out, and then disappeared altogether, giving way to a flat, table-like steppe that smoothly turned into a hilly forest steppe on both banks of the river. The animal world has also changed. The herds of primitive bulls and deer grazing in the steppe were joined by maritaria walking along the reed thickets, similar to giant tapirs, which immediately caught the lens of Samuel Kaplan's photographic weapon, as well as the huge Brantotherium, which differs from its terrestrial rhinoceros counterpart by having a forked horn in the form of a Latin letter vi. Moreover, there was a whole Brantotherium family. In addition to the male, there was a slightly smaller female, as well as 2 cubs with small bumps on their noses instead of horns. Merrily waving their tails, the kids played, running along the coastal shallows, raising fountains of water spray, while the parents ate the dense thickets of coastal reeds. The picture was simply idyllic, and Samuel Kaplan, having replaced his photographic weapon with a movie camera, was able to capture invaluable footage of the life of the Brantotherium family in the wild, once again thanking God and the Royal Navy for including photographs and film equipment among the military cargo. So we swam another couple of dozen kilometers, and, after waiting out the next solar eclipse on the water, we stopped for the night in anticipation of a bright night. And since there were still more than 2 hours left before sunset, it was decided to devote this time to exploring the surroundings. Moreover, the hills that covered the steppe grew in height, becoming like small hills, showing here and there numerous rock outcrops that attracted Yakov like a magnet. Samuel Kaplan, tired of coastal photo hunting, wanted to collect plants, as well as get acquainted with animals living far from the coast. A camping camp was set up on a small island, after which 5 scientific members of the expedition, using one of the boats, crossed the channel, and, leaving the boat under the protection of a pair of Marines, headed for the nearest hill. They walked slowly, giving the geologist and biologist the opportunity to engage in scientific research, and, as it turned out, they were far from unsuccessful.
Cassiterite! Cassiterite is everywhere! The richest deposit!
Yakov, who was the first to reach the top of the hill, defiantly raised his hand with a piece of black-brown rock clenched in it. Or tin ore, he explained. The valuable metal is the base of bronze, and rare. In Europe, in the 17th century, tin was mined only in England, in Cornwall, Miguel de Torres summarized.
Congratulations, Yasha.
Even if we don't find anything else, we didn't come here in vain.
Thank you, Senor de Torres.
But we will find.
We will definitely find it. Yakov broke into a smile. Tin, as a rule, does not occur alone in the ore, in most cases with accompanying, including rare metals. In Cornwall, for example, copper, zinc, lead, bismuth, cobalt, nickel, and tungsten are obtained during ore purification. And since the deposit here is very large, Yakov pointed to the neighboring hills, on whose treeless peaks glittered here and there outcrops of cassiterite rock,
there must be a lot of accompanying metals.
Well, that's great, Miguel de Torres summed up.
And how is your catch, Mr. Kaplan?
He turned to the biologist, who had a rather heavy botanical folder dangling from his side.
I'm more modest, but I still found something useful for our colonial economy.
Here, look. And Samuel Kaplan took out several stems of a plant from a folder, somewhat similar to the reed growing on the banks of Jordan, but with thicker foliage and stems.
Sugarcane is a local variety, and with a huge sugar content. Not like our imported terrestrial beetroot. You can try it.
Indeed, the leaves and stems tasted sickly sweet, indicating a high sucrose content.
I wonder if it's possible to cultivate it here, Michael Finkel asked.
It's too far to drive.
I suppose so, Samuel Kaplan said after a moment's thought.
The climate, in principle, is similar, but we descended very close to the equator in longitude.
250 kilometers north of the parallel of New Jerusalem, Abraham Van Wyden suggested, which is not essential for the local climate. Well, then it's definitely possible, Samuel Kaplan confirmed.
And we will have sugar, like somewhere in Cuba. Can you get a lot of alcohol out of it? Yakov suddenly asked unexpectedly.
Yes, indeed. Why do you need it, Yasha? Samuel Kaplan looked at Yakov in surprise.
You don't seem to drink, and thank God there are no alcoholics in our colony. Not for me to drink, Yakov smiled slyly.
Tractors, and even my biplane can be converted to alcohol. Both diesels and gasoline engines can run on alcohol without any modification. And the power, unlike using the same gas generator, will practically not drop. The only limitation is for gasoline engines with temperatures close to zero, when alcohol does not evaporate well. But this is not the case in our latitudes. So it turns out that there is no need to look for oil. Finally, Miguel de Torres broke the sudden silence.
In principle, yes,
Yakov confirmed. Although I would look for it, you can make a lot of useful things out of it. But, by and large, alcohol has an advantage over oil, in the sense that it is a more easily accessible renewable fuel, the raw materials for which can be grown at home, unlike oil fields, which in Germany, for example, do not exist at all. And not only Germany. The nearest European oil field.
But we'll talk about that later,
Miguel de Torres suddenly interrupted Yakov. Looks like we have company. Or rather, not from us, but from them. He nodded his head in the direction of the herd of pigs grazing at the foot of the hill opposite the river.
You see, the grass is waving, most likely a predator.
Indeed, hiding in the tall thickets of sugarcane, some kind of predatory animal crept up to the herd of unsuspecting pigs, extremely difficult to distinguish due to the presence of a protective green color.
Judging by the movements, it's one of the local feline breed. Samuel Kaplan issued his authoritative scientific conclusion, swapping binoculars for a movie camera, wanting to capture the hunting moment of an as-yet unidentified predator.
Just in time. Suddenly, green lightning shot up from the grass, a deafening piggy squeal rang out, and a young piglet fluttered under the paws of a predator very similar to an earthly tiger.
You saw it! You saw it! What's his name?
Samuel Kaplan muttered in a voice trembling with excitement, without looking up from the movie camera.
What shots? What shots?
But it turned out to be just the beginning. Because in the next instant a huge boar detached itself from the herd of pigs running away in panic and, accelerating like a battering ram, attacked the tiger, distracted by finishing off the captured prey with a kick in the side. He flew several meters away, turning over in the air a couple of times, but still landed, according to a well-known feline feature, on his paws, uttering a ferocious growl full of rage and pain, after which he staggered and collapsed on the grass without signs of life. The boar, having approached the already dead piglet, stood for a while, sniffing it, and then turning he walked towards the herd that had stopped in the distance, of which he was apparently the leader. Amazing! Tiger and wild boar fight. Moreover, the victory belongs to the boar. Samuel Kaplan turned off the camera.
We need to go down and take off the skin. I hope the cleaver, wild boar, didn't mess it up too much. Just so that someone can stay here to watch, Michael Finkel suggested.
And then suddenly this tiger is not alone. It's a good thing we don't have such people, otherwise they would probably have already killed someone. That's how we'll leave our guards, Abraham Van Wyden suggested, nodding towards the Marines running as fast as they could down the hill, obviously having heard the sounds of a tiger and a wild boar fighting and deciding that the scientific group might need help.
They did so, handing one of the Marines a pair of binoculars just in case, and themselves holding their weapons at the ready, headed for the scene of the massacre.
The predator killed by the boar turned out to be a tiger, but from the extinct saber breed on Earth, judging by the huge fangs of the upper jaw, it does not differ in anything but color from its terrestrial counterparts. But the gnawed pig presented a surprise, having ordinary hooves instead of flippers, like those of terrestrial pigs, which formed a new type of animal, the steppe pig.
So, to summarize, Miguel de Torres looked around the audience. A tin deposit has been discovered. Once. A source of renewable fuel for machinery has been obtained. 2. 3 new species of animals and plants have been discovered. And all in one day. Incredible luck. He smiled. And now to the parking lot. The sun is already setting. And loaded with tiger skin, the small group headed for the expedition camp. Chapter 2. Treasures of the Orange Hills. After resting and waiting for the sun to rise, we sailed on to land again a couple of hours later, intrigued by the unusual behavior of the compass, the needle of which, to Abraham Van Wyden's great surprise, suddenly turned around in an east-west line and froze as if attracted by a giant magnet. A magnetic anomaly caused by a nearby iron ore deposit, Yakov issued a professional opinion.
We urgently need to disembark and go on a search. Look over there. He pointed to a passing sandy beach. The sand is not yellow but reddish due to an overabundance of iron. We are already within the boundaries of the deposit.
Indeed, the color of the sand on the shore to which the expedition's boats soon landed was with an unusual reddish tinge, which indicated the presence of such a variety of iron ore as red ironstone, which received the Greek name hematite for its blood-red color, and is nothing more than iron oxide or ordinary rust. It didn't take long to set up the camp, and therefore, in less than a quarter of an hour, the research team plunged into the gorge between the hills, on the slope of one of which there was a strange bright orange spot that aroused the burning interest of the geologist. Well, that's it, which was exactly what had to be proved. Hematite! Yakov pointed with a geological hammer in the direction of an almost vertical, reddish-red wall rising to a good 50 meters, forming a hillside and consisting entirely of only slightly oxidized iron ore from the surface. I'll take samples now. And it's possible. He didn't have time to finish, because the next moment the hammer was torn out of his hands, and after flying a couple of meters, the geological tool crashed into the wall with a crash. After that, the hapless geologist, who had jumped aside and, by pure chance, turned sideways to the giant natural magnet, was left without a rifle hanging on his shoulder, which was firmly magnetized to the hillside next to the hammer. A silent scene ensued, followed by general laughter, which, however, quickly subsided after it became clear that their owner was completely unable to tear off the magnetized objects. This is magnetization. Michael Finkel was amazed.
But we can't leave it all here. I'm not throwing the hammer! I have only one!
Yakov almost howled, trying once again to pull the geological hammer away from the hematite rock that had magnetized it. I should have taken that into account right away, but who knew? And the rifle is also valuable. Yasha, let's grab the belt together, Samuel Kaplan suggested. Abraham Van Wyden also grabbed the shoulder strap of his rifle. And it turned out. The efforts of 3 people turned out to be enough to tear the product of American gunsmiths from the hill, holding it so tenaciously, which, as it turned out later, consisted entirely of iron ore, and therefore possessed truly diabolical magnetization. Then they took up the hammer. But here I had to tinker, using the lever method, which reminded the audience of the words of the great scientist of antiquity, Archimedes of Syracuse.
Give me a fulcrum, and I will turn the earth over!
And only then did the magnetic hill finally part with its prey.
After returning the property, they moved to a safe distance and began to discuss what to do next. On the one hand, a deposit of first-class iron ore, which will last the colony of Israel for hundreds of years, has been found, but, on the other hand, who said that there is only iron ore here, especially considering that there is a tin deposit nearby, almost nearby. But climbing natural magnets, risking being left without much-needed iron objects every minute, is still a pleasure. As a result, after weighing the pros and cons, we decided to limit ourselves to an initial survey of the area through binoculars, climbing to the top of the hill. Moreover, 2 people will go on exploration, a geologist and a geographer, leaving everything iron, and those who remain below will insure them. Moreover, the existing terrain made it possible to keep scouts constantly in sight, and the range of the Springfield 1903 rifles discouraged any predator, including the saber tiger, from wanting to feast on human flesh. Part of the hillside was a natural staircase, and therefore the ascent was not difficult. The descent proved difficult, and not because the natural staircase suddenly collapsed, but because, however, everything is in order. While climbing up, Abraham Van Weyden accidentally noticed shiny yellow inclusions on a dirty white stone half hidden by a layer of earth. "Probably pyrite, Herr Van Weyden." Yakov bent over the stone and, suddenly turning pale, said in a voice trembling with excitement, "Gold! Gold, Herr Van Weyden, in gold-bearing quartz." And there was a lot of gold-bearing quartz around, and the closer to the top, the more. And not only with small gold flecks, but with whole veins of precious metal sparkling in the sun. But all this turned out to be nothing compared to the stunning sight that appeared before the eyes of Jacob and Abraham Van Weyden at the top of the hill. A huge bull-headed gold nugget in the center of a narrow plateau forming the top of the hill, and nearby, like ordinary cobblestones in the mud, lay smaller nuggets, the size of a fist, scattered all over the top. A rifle shot brought both of them out of their stupor, eloquently indicating that the scouts had delayed beyond measure. Well, of course, from the point of view of those who remain below. They didn't know everything. But anyway, I had to go back, taking a couple of gold nuggets with me as a souvenir, having examined the surrounding area before descending, which is the same low hills overgrown with stunted vegetation, with outcrops of orange-red hematite rock. "Gold, gold," sighed Michael Finkel. "It has destroyed so many human souls." "But we don't use it here, Rebbe," Samuel Kaplan reminded him.
That's what makes me happy.
Michael Finkel cheered up.
But it is necessary to go and see this miracle of nature. It happens once in a lifetime, and not for everyone. Just think. A bull's head gold nugget.
"Then let's all go," Miguel de Torres said peremptorily. "Geru Yeager and his fighters should also be interested." And so it happened. And as a result of the pilgrimage, by the end of the day, each of the expedition members, regardless of whether he was a scientist or a Marine, had acquired a small gold nugget, the size of his own fist, in memory of this magical place, because there was no other use for gold in Zion. But gold, as you know, is not only a means of investing capital, but also a stable, non-oxidizing metal, and therefore the entire territory of the Orange Hills on both banks of the Jordan River has been carefully studied. As a result, in addition to iron and gold, it was possible to discover a deposit of platinum and deposits of wolframite, that is, tungsten ore, a source that is so necessary in the production of tungsten electric lamps. And then the discoveries ended, and having assembled the camp, the expedition continued its journey down the Jordan. Everyone was drawn forward by the muse of distant wanderings.
Chapter 3.
Savannah.
What are they doing anyway? And who is it?
Abraham Van Weyden watched with perplexity and interest at the opposite bank of the bayou, where ostriches like shadows scurried in the dim light of Callisto flashing between the clouds. "Have you come to drink?" "It doesn't look like it." "Then we would just stand on the shore and drink. And these, like herons, will enter the water, lower their heads, grab something, and go ashore." Of course, it is logical to assume that the fish. But with a channel depth of no more than a meter, what kind of fish can we talk about in the right amount for these ostriches? So that's a mystery, until the sun rises. Although there should be plenty of mysteries in the savannah, where Jordan made his way through the mountain ranges, but not for a geologist, but for a biologist. So, we are waiting for a new day. And indeed, with the sunrise, everything became clear. There was a steady stream of fish going upstream.
"Spawn!"
Samuel Kaplan announced. It was obvious.
And these,
He nodded towards the ostrich-like creatures sprawled on the shore after a hearty night meal,
decided to feast on fish.
"Let's see what it is, or maybe it's not a sin for us." As it turned out, it's not a sin at all. Salmon were spawning. delicious kosher fish, which made everyone very, very happy. Because firstly, salmon is delicious, and secondly, the skin from which, after appropriate dressing, you can get beautiful and durable leather for making decorative items such as handbags and purses, as well as necessary household clothes and shoes. A radio message immediately went off to New Jerusalem, and the travelers, having harpooned several fish, began cooking breakfast, periodically glancing at the opposite bank of the bayou, where the daytime life of the savannah began, warmed by the rays of the rising sun. And the first one to come for his share of fish turned out to be an impressive behemoth, which, however, despite all its size and power, did not consider it necessary to quarrel with the ostrich-like creatures resting on the shore, which Samuel Kaplan recognized as oviraptors. Wisely avoiding the lizard birds, he climbed into the water and, using his huge, gaping mouth like a net, began to swallow one fish after another, which made the travelers who observed this method of feeding laugh a lot. It was also captured on a photo and a movie camera by Samuel Kaplan, who suggested taking advantage of the moment not to arrange a hiking trip to the savannah, but to stay on the island, studying the animals coming to feed. And so they did. Soon, the first behemoth was joined by another, then another, and another. Lining up across the bayou, they also began to eat fish, which reminded Abraham Van Weyden of a similar picture he had seen on the St. Lawrence River, with the only difference being that there were bears instead of hippos. But not all fans of the fish diet chose to behave decently at this celebration of life. Towards lunchtime, the oviraptors, who were quietly dozing, suddenly became restless, and a new character appeared on the shore. Or rather, the muzzle. A large, bull-like hoofed animal with the head of a dog.
"Entelodont,"
Samuel Kaplan said in a trembling voice, grabbing his rifle. "Climb through the channel, shoot, or he'll eat them all." But I didn't have to shoot. Growling, just for the sake of order, and showing the oviraptors a huge mouthful of teeth, the entelodont went down to the water and began to eat fish, merrily wagging its tail, becoming at the same time another object of cinema and photography. After that, Samuel Kaplan told the audience a lot of interesting things about this unique animal, which is one of the few representatives of predatory ungulates that lived on Earth at the beginning of the Tertiary period of the Cenozoic era and shared its habitat for some time with its equally ferocious relative, the andrews.
Were there any predatory elephants at that time by any chance?
After listening to the biologist's story, Aaron Yeager suddenly asked, "Otherwise, entelodont and andrews can still be shot with our rifles, no bigger than a bull, but an elephant—"
"No, Herr Yeager, they weren't found," Samuel Kaplan hastened to reassure the commander of the Marines.
"An elephant can't be a predator at all, it's too big and clumsy. Although there was one representative of this family, Platybelodon, which, at first glance, could be mistaken for a predator because of the crocodile's mouth instead of a trunk. But he was also a herbivore. The most we could meet here from elephant-sized predators is some kind of dinosaur. But they're not here. Entelodont, judging by its behavior, is the most important, like a lion in the terrestrial savanna. And the oviraptors are rather a relict, possibly an endangered species, remnants of the past. Otherwise, pterodactyls with Archaeopteryx would have been flying over us long ago. So almost the entire Earth day passed in animal observation, after which the weather turned bad. A warm north wind blew a huge blue-black thundercloud, which spilled under deafening thunderclaps in an almost universal flood.
"But there were no such rains on the other side of the mountains."
Abraham Van Weyden drew attention to the unusual weather feature. The mouth of the Jordan must be close. And so it turned out.
Chapter 4.
Alien Footprints.
It's unclear whether it's the sea or the ocean, but the water is salty, which means it's not a lake.
Abraham Van Weyden, standing on a sandy beach, looked through binoculars at the expanse of water stretching beyond the horizon. And even if it's just a large sea bay or an inland sea, then this is most likely the end of the journey. Why take boats to unknown distances when there are ships? After all, Jordan is navigable along its entire length, not only for galleons, but also for the Neptune, and if necessary. But it is unlikely that this need, in the sense of overseas trade, will arise in the near future. There is no one to trade with. For in 2 months, having traveled more than 2,000 kilometers, they did not encounter the slightest sign of the presence of not only a civilized person, but also the very last savage. So the Rebbe is right. This world was given by the Lord to us, and only to us. And only our descendants will inhabit all its expanses, living in peace and harmony without murder and blood, as a single people united by one faith, one language, one law. And what has been done now in this expedition is just the first spark of the flame that...
The pyramid! There's a pyramid in the forest!
The cry of Samuel Kaplan running towards the camp, who a quarter of an hour ago went to the coastal cliff, towering over the mouth of the Jordan for landscape photography, tore Abraham Van Weyden away from contemplating the sea and thoughts about the future. A pyramid in the forest? What kind of pyramid? Did Samuel see the pyramid from the top of the cliff? My heart sank uncomfortably. So much for peace, exclusively for us Jews. Of course, you're dreaming. Jews have never built pyramids, except as slaves, but the Indians did. And in any case, in his 17th century, outsiders were not treated with special friendliness. And the Egyptians, they also built and kept the Jews in slavery for 400 years. Well, never mind. 12.5 rifles is a serious argument in negotiations, although this, of course, is up to Commander Aaron Jaeger to decide. If an expedition is declared under martial law, he is in charge. Meanwhile, Samuel Kaplan, having reached the camp and caught his breath, began to report. Ger Jaeger, there is a pyramid in the forest about 1 kilometer from the shore. There are 2 more buildings nearby. They look like houses, but with a flat roof. Everything is made of black stone. They are surrounded by a wall, like a fortress. As soon as I climbed the cliff, I saw it right away. Have you seen people? No, Mr. Jaeger, and it's far away, and I don't have binoculars. And you know what kind of eyes I have. So go right down and warn me. Or should I have stayed and watched? No, Mr. Kaplan, don't. You did everything right, the commander of the Marines, and now also the senior of the expedition, said after a moment's thought. It looks like the ruins of an abandoned city. Otherwise, we would have been discovered long ago. But I need to see for myself. Yasha, get in touch with Mr. Stern. Let me know what and how.
Mr. Van Weyden, you're with me!
From the top of the cliff, there was a magnificent view of the wooded shore overgrown with tree ferns, in the depths of which, indeed, at a distance of about 1 kilometer, there was an obvious creation of human hands, which was a smooth, 4-sided pyramid of coal-black color, in front of which 2 small, also coal-black cubes towered. And all this was surrounded by an ash-gray, rectangle-shaped wall, partially overgrown with ivy and other creeping plants, as well as the courtyard paved with the same ash-gray slabs of this incomprehensible architectural structure, with an obvious mix of styles. The Black Pyramid had a smooth shape in common with the pyramids of Egypt, rather than a stepped shape like the American pyramids. And with the pyramids of America, there is a narrow staircase built on the shore-facing side and rising from ground level to about 1/3, most likely before the entrance. The black cubes didn't look like any of the temples Abraham Van Weyden had seen in Egypt or America, and they didn't even look like flat-roofed houses, but like ordinary children's cubes, magnified many times and painted black. No less incongruous was the wall encircling all this jumble of geometric shapes, which clearly had no defensive significance. Tall but thin, with a complete absence of battlements, combat platforms and defensive towers mandatory for any fortress, at least in the corners, it gave the impression not of a fortress wall, but rather of a fence designed to protect against petty thieves and wild animals, rather than from enemies. What is your opinion, Mr. Van Weyden? What's it?
I don't know, Mr. Yeager.
Abraham Van Weyden lowered the binoculars. The pyramid is smooth, four-sided. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were buried in such graves. This is a confirmation that this is the tomb of a local ruler, and two smaller black cubic buildings may be the tombs of his entourage. But in Egypt, after the funeral, the pyramids were closed and the entrance was hidden in every possible way. There is also a staircase attached, clearly leading to the entrance, which is typical of the pyramids of the Indians, who used them as temples. But why build a temple in the middle of the forest?
And there are no traces of people, as well as construction work, Herr Van Weyden. And they should be. Aaron Yeager raised the binoculars to his eyes again. Not a single overgrown clearing. All the trees are the same height. The builders couldn't have dragged stones over the suspension bridge, unless all the trees were cut down and the new forest grew only later. But why? It's a lot of work. We stood and watched for a while longer, but without coming to any definite conclusion, except that this incomprehensible structure had been abandoned for a very long time. We returned to the camp.
Let's go and take a look, Miguel de Torres decided, having regained his seniority in the expedition due to the absence of immediate danger.
And whether it's a temple, the burial of a local ruler, or something else, it doesn't really matter. The main thing is that there is no one nearby. All we needed was a war with the locals. I literally had to cut through the forest using cutlasses like machetes. Then we went out onto a narrow, a couple of meters wide, concrete paved road, along which we easily reached the gates of the wall surrounding this tomb temple. The wall was also made of concrete, and the gate was made of some strange carbolite-like material. Moreover, the gates were not locked and did not open as usual, inwards or outwards, but moving sideways. It's more like an abandoned monastery than a tomb or a temple. Miguel de Torres was the first to express his opinion about what he saw. And the head of the expedition had every reason to do so, because both buildings, similar to black cubes, nevertheless turned out to be residential buildings. And considering that the pyramid standing next to it, due to the presence of stairs, is definitely a temple, the assumption about the purpose of this building standing alone in the middle of the forest suggested itself.
I hope they're not pagans, Michael Finkel sighed.
It's a pyramid. That's unlikely, Rebbe, Abraham Van Weyden hastened to reassure the rabbi. As far as I know, the pagan Indians in the Americas did not have monasteries. Serving God by entering a monastery is an exclusively Christian tradition.
God grant it! God grant it! Michael Finkel sighed again. We got along with Christians and Muslims, but with pagans?
And this monastery reminds me of Russian Orthodox monasteries, said Samuel Kaplan. True, I have not seen such hermitages myself, but I have read that in Siberia, somewhere in the forest, in the wilderness, monks are building a monastery to maximize their privacy. But there is something similar here.
Not really,
Yakov objected. The fact that the place is very remote, yes, but they had air transport and more than one thing, and vertical takeoff, helicopters.
Here, look.
He pointed to the strange circles with a crosshair in the center, still quite clearly visible on the concrete pavement near both buildings.
At first I thought it was a symbol of their faith, but then I decided not to. Who will trample on their own faith? But for orientation when landing a helicopter, that's the thing. Can we go inside? Aaron Jaeger suggested, who, like a couple of Marines, was already pretty tired of listening to the opinions of scientists.
That's right, Miguel de Torres agreed.
Because we're standing here, and it doesn't make it any clearer. But first, let's go around.
Circumambulating the buildings around the perimeter did not bring anything new. All the same windows on the upper, obviously residential floors, and another gate on the opposite wall, giving access to a garage located on the ground floor, or taking into account the storage of aircraft in it, a hangar. The gates, both the first and the second, were locked from the inside, but the door in the end wall opened easily, giving access to a semi-dark hall, which was suddenly illuminated by milky white light falling from the ceiling.
and although the light was dim and did not differ in strength from the light of an ordinary electric light bulb in any of the houses of New Jerusalem, the very suddenness caused business. Aaron Jaeger, who was opening the door, jumped back like a bullfighter from a bull rushing at him, at the same time ripping the rifle from his shoulder. Both of his subordinates did the same, aiming at the doorway, while everyone else just froze, turning into statues. But fortunately, nothing terrible or extravagant happened. There was no monster waiting in ambush behind the opened door. And the handsome elder did not appear with the words, "Peace be upon you, good people." Just a working electric light.
"It turned on when the door was opened," Aaron Jaeger grumbled, shouldering his rifle. "So there's a power plant still operating somewhere, or a settlement nearby, and there's a cable coming from there," he finished with obvious concern in his voice. "It's unlikely by cable," Yakov doubted. "There's nothing for dozens of kilometers here. Electricity is provided by the cladding. All this is a black coating on both houses and a pyramid. A solid photovoltaic battery that converts light into electricity. They showed us one in physics at the university. Complete similarity. I realized this when I looked at it up close. I just didn't think it was still working. Everything has been abandoned here for a long time. Yasha, for the future, be kind enough to report everything you guess right away," Miguel de Torres said with feigned seriousness. "Otherwise, you can get a heart attack from surprise. Okay, let's go inside." Inside the hall, there was a staircase leading up and a door giving access to the hangar, which they decided to postpone due to the lack of lighting, starting the inspection from the top floor. And then the hypothesis about the monastery crumbled like a house of cards. On all floors, instead of monks' cells, there were laboratories, biological, physical, chemical, and God knows what others, filled with incomprehensible equipment. Monks who prefer science to prayer. "I'm sorry, I don't believe it," said Aaron Jaeger, sitting down in a swivel chair on wheels, which moaned piteously under his powerful body. "I don't believe it, that's all." "This must be some kind of scientific center," Michael Finkel agreed with the commander of the Marines. "Aaron's right. Monks will not practice science instead of prayer." "And then the big pyramid is the main power plant outside and the warehouse inside," suggested Miguel de Torres. "We'll find out soon enough." "And here's what I don't understand. One of the Marines decided to share his thoughts." "My brother is studying to be an engineer. So here, in New Jerusalem, everything is close at the university, and labs and classrooms and a library, and these guys built a science center, God knows where. And if you need any materials or books, that's how long it takes to get there." "But I don't understand something else." Abraham Van Wyden joined the conversation. "They have electricity. It means development, as we have on Earth in the 20th century. Then there should be a radio. Why don't we hear it on the radio? Or is it possible?" "Not all ranges are accepted by radars," explained the second Marine, the expedition's replacement radio operator. "But the radio station on Neptune is all wave, and also nothing in 2 years. Unless all the locals died of some kind of epidemic long before we arrived," Samuel Kaplan said in a trembling voice. "Then that explains a lot." "They didn't die, they flew away." Jacob, who had been silent before, looked like a man who had just received a revelation from God. "Do you remember the movie Spaceflight, where cosmonauts from Soviet Russia flew to the moon? Now imagine. You didn't just arrive, collect samples, and fly away, but decided to explore the planet in detail and comprehensively. And what will you need in this case?" Yakov paused significantly. "Stationary, long-term, scientific base. Scientists won't live in tents for several years. And what happens when the work ends? And what we see here and now. An abandoned space expedition base, although perhaps not abandoned but mothballed, since everything works here. And the death of the entire population of the planet due to the epidemic? We would have quarantined it. Of course, some people would have died, but not all of them." "I don't quite agree with you about quarantine, Yasha," Samuel Kaplan said in a cheerful voice.
He didn't help much with the Spanish flu.
But you're right about the fact that this is an abandoned, or rather mothballed space expedition base. That explains absolutely everything. Congratulations, Yasha. You're a genius.
Chapter 5.
On the path of progress.
Do you understand what we have discovered here? Miguel de Torres said in a voice trembling with excitement after Yakov had finished accepting congratulations on his truly brilliant guess.
When we first arrived here, we had the 17th century. When the Neptune arrived, it was 20 at once. And now I do not even know how many centuries or millennia we will step forward. We need to shake up this entire database from top to bottom and inform Mr. Stern immediately. You may need more specialists besides us. I don't even rule out that one of the galleons, if something large has to be exported.
Did you hear everything? Aaron Yeager turned to the Marines.
Quickly get to the camp and hand over everything.
And bring an electric torch on the way back, Miguel de Torres asked.
It is still unknown whether there are lights in other buildings, and the first floor needs to be examined here. The Marines went to take orders, and Miguel de Torres continued to announce a plan for further action.
We are currently examining the second building. We're not going into the hangar yet, and to the pyramid. If there's a light there, we'll examine it. If not, we wait until they bring a flashlight, and then...
Can we try to turn this on? Yakov suddenly suggested, nodding towards the table, on which there was a device consisting of a black vertically standing rectangle connected by electric wires to a keyboard lying on the tabletop, like a typewriter, and a small oval box with a pair of buttons and a wheel between them. It's very similar to the combination of a typewriter and a TV, he explained.
But there is no such thing as what the text itself prints. That's what I thought. And if they not only printed the lyrics, but also how we, for example, recorded music on records. And then, if you enable...
Try it!
Miguel de Torres agreed without even listening to the rest. And the Rebbe will try to translate it if necessary.
I'll try very hard, Michael Finkel assured.
It's interesting for myself. And I think it will work. There are clearly letters on the keys, which means that the writing is not hieroglyphic, which is much simpler, not like the Chinese. Of course, Abraham van Weyden, the chief linguist of the colony, mentally agreed, recalling his first trip to Batavia, where he was truly horrified to learn that each word of the Chinese language corresponds to one hieroglyph. The unfortunate inhabitants of the Celestial Empire. How can you remember so much? Meanwhile, Yakov, sitting in the wheelchair given to him by Aaron Yeager, studied the creation of alien technical thought for several minutes, and then pressed the button next to the power cable, and the device started working. The screen of the typewriter TV lit up with white light, after which an amazing color image appeared on it. The seashore and the crescent moon of Jupiter hanging in the bottomless blue sky. And in the foreground, as if on top of the main picture, there were red rectangles with inscriptions under them, and a white arrow that shifted slightly when Yakov slightly moved the oval box. And it was already confidently crawling across the screen, repeating the movement of the oval box that lay in Yakov's hand, as if it had been poured. Further. More. Pointing a white arrow at one of the red rectangles, Yakov made it change color to a golden yellow. Clicking on one of the buttons of the oval box caused the rectangle to expand to cover the entire screen, against a white background of which smooth rows of rectangles of various colors appeared, again with inscriptions under them. Pointing a white arrow at the purple square with a black cross depicted at the top of the screen and pressing the button on the oval box again, reduced the golden yellow rectangle to its original size, returning the original red color. "It's like in my grandfather's accountant's office," Samuel Kaplan commented on what he saw.
The red rectangles represent folders, and the multicolored ones represent individual documents on different topics.
And so it turned out. It also turned out that the amount of information contained inside this amazing typewriter TV is truly enormous. Moreover, texts in the language of aliens, photos, and filming, including the builders of the space base themselves, very similar to humans, accounted for only a small fraction. Everything else, in Yakov's opinion, as the most technically literate, was nothing more than scientific information from various fields of knowledge.
Okay, Yasha, turn it off, Miguel de Torres ordered after the returning Marines finally brought a flashlight. There are more than one day's work here. This electric library is not going anywhere from us. Everyone, let's go. We didn't stay on the ground floor for long, because we already knew from the photos we viewed on the typewriter TV that there were disc-shaped aircraft in the hangar used by members of the alien expedition to fly to various places in Zion and in near space. Moreover, Yakov, without trying to turn on anything this time, having tested the pilot's seat, declared that he would be able to lift this amazing machine into the sky, although the principle of creating lift was completely incomprehensible to him. The second, a residential building, was thoroughly examined, but alas, without much success. With the exception of the equipment in the medical unit, which Michael Finkel was extremely interested in, nothing new could be found. We started exploring the pyramid right after lunch, and immediately realized that we had come to something very, very important. The entrance, which turned out to be an airlock, was blocked by massive safe doors at least 6 inches thick. And even if they had the simplest lock, it would be absolutely impossible to get inside without using dynamite or other explosives. But fortunately, there was no lock. There was only a locking mechanism, as on the control hatch of a submarine, and therefore it was not difficult to open both doors. Obviously not from robbers. Miguel de Torres commented on such an unusual entrance design, searching the dark corridor with a flashlight beam going deep into the pyramid. Rather from the influence of the external environment, suggested Samuel Kaplan.
There's not even any dust here.
So is Sveta, sighed Michael Finkel. The flashlight won't last long.
We should look for a switchboard,
Yakov suggested. If this pyramid is a warehouse, as we assume, it is unlikely that the light here will turn on by itself, or the automation was turned off during conservation. And so it turned out. It was worth turning the knob on the switchboard installed near the door combing, and a bright milky white light flooded everything around, making it possible to examine in detail a not particularly long but rather wide corridor ending in 2 sides and 1 end, again with safe doors. Well, Rebbe, you were worried. Miguel de Torres smiled and switched off the flashlight. Now I'm almost sure that this base is not abandoned but rather mothballed, since everything is working here. So where do we start? We decided to start clockwise, that is, from the left side door, opening which we realized that we had not made a mistake in the purpose of the pyramid. There was a circular tunnel around the perimeter, along the walls of which, going up to the ceiling, there were shelves filled with containers in which, with the expectation of centuries and millennia of storage, thousands and thousands of books rested, the receptacle of the wisdom of an alien civilization. I shouldn't have translated the film, Samuel Kaplan complained when, having walked along the entire length of the tunnel, the researchers entered the already familiar corridor from the opposite door. Who knew that they would print everything that was in this typewriter TV and hide it here?
Not entirely for nothing, Abraham Van Wyden objected.
And the maps of Zion. They may not be as clear in the photos from the screen, but where would we find them here? It's not just for 1 month of work, but to sort everything out. And it is not necessary that everything printed repeats what is in a typewriter. TV. Yakov supported Abraham Van Wyden.
They could only print out the most valuable. And the rest?
They could, Samuel Kaplan agreed.
Yes, it probably was. Then it will be necessary to retake everything that is there. But that's when we get home. Otherwise, the film may still be needed.
And 1 ship is enough for us to take everything out? Aaron Yeager suddenly asked a purely practical question.
There's so much going on here.
It may not be enough. Abraham Van Wyden quickly estimated the galleon's capacity.
Besides, we haven't looked at everything here yet.
That's right, not all of them. It's still unknown what's in there. Miguel de Torres nodded towards the end door. Otherwise, we may need not 2, but all 3 ships. Contrary to expectations, the end door turned out to be not another warehouse, but a rather large room with incomprehensible equipment installed in it. A massive ring with a diameter of more than 3 meters, standing vertically on a concrete pedestal, occupied its entire central part, and directly opposite the door, made in the form of a small podium, a remote control was mounted, from which, apparently, the ring was controlled. But it was not possible to understand what this work consisted of at first, or from the second, or even from the third glance. And finished the inspection, and returned to the coastal camp without revealing perhaps the most important secret of the pyramid. Not really.
Turn it on, Yasha.
Maybe that's how we'll understand something, Miguel de Torres ordered, and a cheerful insolence flashed in his eyes.
This moment.
Yakov, who was in exactly the same research fever, pressed the button with the already familiar alien symbol on, off. Nothing happened for a couple of moments. Then the screen on the remote lit up, and a gradually lengthening vertical line appeared on it, near which alien numbers replaced each other. It's either charging or gaining power, Yakov explained what was happening on the screen.
Let's wait.
I had to wait for quite a long time, almost a quarter of an hour, but then the indicator line stopped lengthening, and Yakov randomly pressed one of the control buttons. And then, the unexpected happened. An image that was striking in realism and quality appeared inside the ring. An ash-gray, cratered rolling plain to the horizon under a velvety black starless sky and a crescent moon of Jupiter, much larger than what the inhabitants of Zion are already accustomed to seeing.
A movie projector? Michael Finkel said with obvious disappointment in his voice. But what a quality! It's like looking out the window. Abraham Van Wyden tried to sweeten the pill.
I wonder how it is created. There is no movie camera anywhere, Miguel de Torres said thoughtfully and led the way to the ring, dragging the others with him. But the reality, as usual, exceeded all the wildest expectations. What was initially mistaken for an image turned out to be a window, or rather a door, allowing you to instantly move to Jupiter's second moon, Europa, where Miguel de Torres was the first to get to in his attempt to understand the essence of what was happening, stepping over the rim of the ring. And now all 7 of them, standing under the transparent dome, looked around with the greatest interest and surprise at the lifeless gray ash plain with traces of meteorite impacts, feeling an unusual lightness in their bodies. And if the crossing closes? Suddenly, like lightning, an absolutely obvious thought cut through Yakov's mind. Energy was accumulating there. And now.
And it seemed that everyone else, as if sensing something was wrong, understood him without words, suddenly falling silent and frozen in place.
Back up, one at a time.
Aaron Jaeger gave the command softly, but with steel in his voice, who did not forget, despite all the incredible events, that he was responsible for the safety of the expedition, just in time. The passage closed behind him. "We did something incredibly stupid today," Miguel de Torres finally said. "If the crossing had been closed a little earlier, we would have simply disappeared for everyone, and no one would have found us for a very long time."
Not knowing the ford, do not go into the water,
Samuel Kaplan quoted the centuries-old folk wisdom. "And we climbed into the steam boiler like savages, and let's turn the valves. It is still unknown where the other buttons open the transitions." "Most likely to other planets and moons," suggested Yakov. "This transparent hemisphere is something like a small scientific station with only instruments. And for the repair or removal of data, this instantaneous transition through the ring was made so that they would not fly through space."
"It makes sense,"
Miguel de Torres agreed. "And in this case, without risk, without passing through the ring, we can observe from this side."
"And take a picture."
Samuel Kaplan immediately supported the idea of continuing to operate the alien technology.
"It's just a pity that it's not clear which button opens the transition to where. If Io hadn't been on the background of Jupiter, we wouldn't have realized that we were on Europa."
"Yep."
"I don't think there will be any difficulties with that," Abraham Van Wyden objected. "There are symbols on the buttons, and when the Rebbe deciphers their language, it will be possible to read which button corresponds to which planet or satellite." And it began. opening a transition, photographing, recharging, opening another transition, photographing again, and recharging again. And the most interesting thing is that science stations equipped with instant transfer were installed not only on satellites and planets, but also in various places of Zion. In particular, not far from New Jerusalem, near the notorious Salt Lake. It seems that the desire to swim where you can't drown was inherent not only to the people of Earth, but also to scientists from an alien base.
"That's it. Turn it off, Yasha," Miguel de Torres ordered when the last crossing was closed.
That's enough for today. We're going to the camp now. We're radioing Hera Stern, and let him decide what's next. But as far as I'm concerned, this expedition is over.
And so it turned out. Taking into account all that had happened, the leadership of the colony of Israel decided to end the expedition and send 2 galleons to export the valuables found on the alien base. While waiting for the ships to arrive, the members of the scientific group were to study the materials available in the pyramid's storage, if possible, and Abraham Van Weyden, using the instant transfer point near the Salt Lake, arrived in New Jerusalem to pilot the ships. So for the first time, but far from the last time, the inhabitants of the colony of Israel took advantage of the fact that they were given a lucky chance. 3 months later, Abraham Van Weyden safely brought Abraham and Moses, loaded with the wisdom of an alien world, to the island of Zion, thus opening a new page in the history of the colony of Israel. Chapter 6. We are each other's starry echoes. Epilogue. The Solar System, Planet Earth, the Middle East, the Negev Desert, the Israel Defense Forces Radar Surveillance and Control Station.
Is that all?
A middle-aged man in a low-key civilian suit, who looked somewhat like a university professor, looked questioningly at a young woman sitting at the keyboard with the shoulder straps of an IDF captain and 2 sergeants, the main culprits of the incident, who clearly felt somewhat confused in the presence of an entire Mossad general. It's not every day that their radar station, lost in the vastness of the desert, is visited by top intelligence officials, and even for such an unusual reason, to put it mildly. But how well it all started. We debugged and set up the receiving antenna, having conducted the required set of tests, and were about to report on readiness, when suddenly a strange radio signal from the depths of space, and in it a message from an extraterrestrial civilization, and not from some little green men, but from Jewish compatriots who, as a result of spontaneous teleportation through the Einstein-Rosen space-time tunnel, landed on a viable satellite of a giant planet orbiting in the habitable zone around 23 stars in the constellation Libra, and created a space colony there, and now they are trying to get out, to contact the mother planet. No, at first, of course, they didn't believe me. You never know who could make such a sophisticated joke. As you know, Israel has enough well-wishers. But when we analyzed the signal and, after rummaging through the World Wide Web, we found full confirmation of the facts stated in the message. Not at all. More photos, from different periods of the colony's life, from the foundation to the moment of sending the message. With a click of the mouse, a gallery of photographs appeared on the monitor screen, slowly replacing each other. The New Jerusalem under construction and the ships anchored. New Jerusalem again, but already completely rebuilt, with rows of neat, like toy houses and a central square, on 3 sides of which rise, apparently, the town hall, the synagogue, and the university. Another photo. The New Jerusalem will be many years later, somewhat similar to a megacity, but without the skyscrapers characteristic of planet Earth, and instead of the fields that once surrounded the island of Zion, all the same toy houses and magnificent bridges over the Jordan River. Another photo. The central square of New Jerusalem turned into a museum, where 4 17th-century galleons and a steamboat from the 20th century, covered with a transparent dome on stone pedestals, are forever frozen. Monument to the founding settlers. More and more photos, industrial and agricultural settlements,
an airport with rows of disc-shaped aircraft on the airfield, a radio astronomy observatory, from whose huge antenna the message was sent, and finally, the alien base, a wide plateau surrounded by a concrete wall, 2 scientific and residential modules, cubes, and a 4-sided pyramid stretching into the sky, silent evidence of the creation of extraterrestrial intelligence.
That's it now. Although, the captain thought about it.
Of course, there may have been more files, but the Earth rotates, and the antenna's receiving cone is very narrow.
It's not critical. That's enough for us, the general smiled. And now about the current situation. Your actions will be recognized as correct. The information has been withdrawn. I hope I don't need to remind you about maintaining secrecy.
And yet, the general paused.
I've looked at your personal files. You're all scientists, and since you've gotten into all this, I suggest you join my team.
And what are we going to do? One of the sergeants asked.
And what is happening today? And what the U.S. Air Force has been doing and is doing under the Blue Book program?
Yes, and we have one, only under a different name.
Well, do you agree?
The eyes of all 3 of them, which lit up with the keenest interest, were more eloquent than any words.
That's great!
The general smiled again. Then get ready. We are flying to South Africa to the Cape of Good Hope in the near future. We will look for the transition point. It is still possible to believe in the accidental opening of a tunnel in the 17th century. But at 20, when the Neptune was transferred, it was already too much. There is a clear pattern here, so we have to find out who or what opens this tunnel. Otherwise, at the radio communication level, 85 light-years away, we are just the stellar echo of each other.